Okay, great. So I've got Kelly Watkins with me, who's a psychologist. And today I'm going to go through a few questions with you, Kelly, which I've lined up. I'm going to type as I go along. Is that okay?
Yes.
So I can get some kind of answers as I go along with it.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to kind of look at a few of the questions, or what do you think about the quality of the questions I was posing, I suppose?
No, yeah. The questions seem just suitable to obviously what we've been chatting about.
Yeah.
I didn't really assess the quality of them, but they seem to make sense to me.
Good. Right. Well, let's get stuck in. Let's just go straight into it then. So my first question to you is, do you believe that there's currently or will be soon a mental health epidemic stemmed from comparison culture in young people?
Yeah, I think this question, kind of my initial response from that was, it feels like we're in a mental health epidemic already.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of my initial reaction to that. But I definitely feel that as kind of social media and everything is becoming so much more at the forefront of people's lives, and particularly with young people, that I can only see, unfortunately, things getting more difficult for young people. And I think seeing, like, I've got someone in my family, how old is he? He's not even one yet. And he knows how to use the phone, and kind of that craving for like the to use the phone. And that, I can only imagine that is then going to translate to then maybe wanting to play on things. And it just feels like, yeah, things are heading in that direction. Things get more difficult.
What kind of challenges do you see for young people and social media, I suppose, following on from that?
I think just being able to distinguish between real life and social media, because it becomes so normal for them. I think creating that distinction, I think, is just going to become so difficult. And I think particularly with like the use of filters, and how that just filters people's perception of how they can be perceived and how other people portray themselves, and not really, even though that they know that they use filters, not really considering that other people might be doing the same.
Yeah.
I think they're going to, that's obviously like kind of the core of the difficulties, and I think the things will just continue from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So do you think, so my next question is, what do you see as the kind of main drivers behind this epidemic? You mentioned social media, and I think social media is one of them. Do you think there's any other drivers, or do you want to kind of dig in more into social media and why it's a driver behind this kind of comparison culture we're seeing nowadays?
I think social media, but then like societal pressure as well. I think that there is that drive within, say, with publications, that they're trying to maybe overcome the bias that people see through social media, but I still don't think that there's enough done. You still see images of people being like, oh, these people look amazing, but these people look horrible. And someone looking at it, they're still going to compare themselves and be like, okay, this person's horrible, attributing kind of all those negative characteristics towards themselves. And I suppose within that, even though it's the driver, the outcome would be obviously the impact on low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, all the other kind of the mental health difficulties that come with it.
And when you say kind of publications, are you talking about kind of beauty magazines or kind of health and wellness magazines? Is that the kind of publication you're talking about?
Yeah, so like, I don't really know what to call them, like the magazines that you always see in the supermarket. I'm not going to name, but like those sorts of ones. But then also like what you said about with the health and wellness. Again, I don't think some of those are entirely as promoting that wellness as much, because it's still like, oh, we'll do these exercises to get these abs and kind of eat this diet, and all of that information. It's information overload, isn't it? And then it makes it so confusing to know what information to follow, which then I just think kind of adds to the confusion, adds to the pressures. And particularly if you think with the younger generation coming through with their parents could be also like using filters, and they're looking to their caregivers of how they're behaving, and they still may be behaving in, there may be similar patterns as well, which then obviously just reconfirms the things that they may be picking up at school or on social media.
I mean, filters is an interesting one. It's I've never used filters before. For whatever reason I didn't feel the need to. But it is something I've heard people talking about, and more recently, that it can just, I suppose in skincare, in the area that I'm in, a filter can effectively make your skin look blemish free. So that's why a lot of young women would be using such a thing to make their skin look, you know, how they want to make it look on social media. And now it's become a big thing about kind of exposing that and saying, look, my skin actually isn't like this, despite what this what the screen makes you think, or, you know, how it's tricking your mind to making think that I am like that. So that's the kind of angle I've seen. Okay, so let's go to my next question here. Do you think that this is something, I suppose, again, highlighting comparison culture, that's uniquely driven by social media, allowing us to be in such close proximity to the thoughts and feelings of others who we don't know personally? Do you think that that's kind of a massive factor, or one of the biggest ones?
Yeah, I think it is one of the biggest factors. It's hard to think of another factor that would be as impactful as social media. Because I think that, as you said, it allows people to have that connection, or supposed connection, with other people who they don't know, and which can be beneficial. I think it's not, sometimes having that connection with people who are going through similar things can be really, it creates that community in a way that they couldn't have got maybe where they are. Again, I've seen that on social media where people have created really supportive communities. But in terms of like the comparison culture, it definitely doesn't. People never post their failures on social media. They don't post when things are going bad. It's always the best time, and it just creates that skewed lens of how people see it, and then people just accept that to be the norm. When it's not. It creates, as I said, the difficulty to distinguish, and then the difficulty to then rationalize, because sometimes I have people coming to practice, and when you're talking to them, they can rationalize it. They know that that's not real, but in that moment when they're scrolling endlessly, they've like dived into this social media world that they can't pull themselves out of.
Yeah, I mean, my observation is that you're very right in saying that communities are important and they're a force of positivity on social media, but I just see, so they're so kind of few and far between. There's so much trash in between actual supportive communities that you've got to dig through the 95% trash. And unfortunately, that's what your scroll wheel is. You come across all the garbage, which can, you know, infest your mind and put negative thoughts in your mind before you come across one supportive community. You think, okay, this is actually useful material for me, or whatever. And yeah, that's what I think. Currently, I mean, personally, the scroll wheel is a very ingenious invention by the social media gurus, but it's the ultimate time sink, and perhaps an ultimate spiral of negativity for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize how long they're doing it as well. It almost becomes kind of this pit that you don't realize how long you're in it for. And I suppose just backtracking slightly just made me reflect that even for myself, obviously my social media is about kind of mental health and supporting people. I still get trolls when I do lives on my messages, and it's kind of, I'm no one kind of that, like you see like influence or people with a lot of followers, and it's like that it's not just me that goes through. I had someone, so I did a live this week, and someone was like, oh, like you're not wearing any makeup, like you look really ugly, why have you not wearing any makeup when you're coming on a live? And like there was other people asking like questions about their mental health, and this person was like bombarding like comment after comment after comment. So, and it was really distracting. And then, but again, if that was happening to someone who maybe wasn't as able to challenge their negative thoughts, if that were happening to me probably 10 years ago, it would have been a completely different story for me. But I think kind of now it is slightly different, but it can definitely still impact on how you're feeling.
Yeah, no, that's very important. I mean, that's something I've been lucky that I've not really come across many trolls for myself personally. And I wonder, being kind of young and female, is there a greater preponderance to getting trolls coming after you than being, for example, young and male, I guess? Do you get fewer trolls? I don't know if people have done a study on who gets trolled more. But yeah, It'd be interesting to do, absolutely. And maybe if it's relevant to profession as well, like maybe as a doctor, I get less trolls for whatever reason than say, someone who is in, you know, in another field, maybe health and wellness, just more generally, or like fitness, you know, maybe they get more trolls. But anyway, that's an aside, isn't it? I suppose. Discussion for another day. So back to my questions. The next one I've got, interesting one. Have you had any significant contact with patients or people suffering from what I call malignant comparisons? If so, what's your experience with them or that, or what's been, yeah, your personal experience?
Definitely, and kind of feeding onto that kind of reflection there, they have mainly been females.
Okay.
That have come in. There have been, say, out of 10 females that have come in, there's maybe been one male.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it is quite a disparity between kind of the genders. But it's often, yeah, as I said, females, age range, teens to late 30s. That would be kind of the demographics of it. Again, if we're talking race, a range of races, a range of kind of locations of where they live. But I think that it is heavily weighted for the younger people, like kind of teens and early 20s, but there's definitely been people up until the age of 30. But then interestingly, I did a workshop, it wasn't last year, must have been the year before now, and there was people there in their 60s and they still had it, but they just didn't have the social media element.
So what's their main complaints? What do they come in kind of complaining about?
Just the kind of that they feel really low about themselves. They've got a lot of negative thoughts, that they spend a lot, the ones that do use social media spend a lot of time on social media comparing themselves, looking for ways that they can change their appearance to match the people that they think is kind of more desirable to be. And then like thinking about kind of the halo effect, of thinking that those people then, because they look a certain way, then they're going to have all these positive characteristics as well. That would kind of be the main. So yeah, is at the core of it is the low self-esteem difficulties.
And I find that actually, you mentioned that, and I think it's a uniquely depressing factor of our society where people say want to emulate someone like Kim Kardashian to look exactly the way, like that's what we aspire to as a society for young women, and it's made to be the norm because it's in our faces in social media, being the first thing that we see, you know, when we were switching on our phones, and it's kind of leading to these aspirations which are rather, in my mind, I think they're quite false and really destructive to someone to want to aspire to be like that,
and from such a young age as well.
And from a young age as well, absolutely. And it's interesting that it goes into late 60s, or it could go into 60s as well, I suppose. I'm guessing how they compare themselves is through kind of work colleagues, maybe, or in their families, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so in more social situations, that it comes in, and that age group are the ones that normally still buy the magazines. Yeah. So in terms of it still being portrayed to them just through a different avenue. But there is definitely a lot more of or even kind of walking down the street in the supermarket. Like we had this whole conversation of like the shopping basket guilt of looking at someone who they deem to kind of be attractive or something that they desired to be like, and then looking in their like in their basket and thinking, well, that's kind of what I need to eat to look like that, and the shame of then looking in their own basket. And that was a conversation that came out. I found it fascinating.
That's very interesting, actually. I suppose there's anything further to say on this question. Yeah, in that it's something as much as like even in person you can compare yourself, and it can lead to this kind of negative thought pattern. And do these people, are you seeing them, are they on medication? Are they depressed? Or are they mostly kind of not being treated for this?
It's a range, really, in the medication. But I think from what we've kind of been discussing, that seeing kind of this malignant comparison as almost something standalone. Yes, there is kind of the underpinning of like anxiety, low mood, low self-esteem. But when you're treating it, you almost treat it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Which is something that I've noticed.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole kind of ethos behind why I'm doing this. I think it's a unique phenomenon. This is nature, it's unique to humans almost, I suppose, and some primates as well, in that this kind of constant comparison. It's how we live our lives. We always want to compare this to that, and we do it everywhere. Compare this car to that car, my computer to your computer, whatever. Do you know what I mean? And it's almost like it can be insufferable at times. And I suppose it kind of follows on to my next question. Do you see this problem like now because of social media progressing from children to like adults in the Gen Z category?
Definitely. I think because it's something that's, if it's not highlighted as something that's causing them difficulties, then it can be something that is going to progress. And I think there needs to be the identification of the impact of it. But it's almost like when there's a whole community coming, or like generation coming through with it, to get people, it'll be the ones that maybe are impacted most. Oh, I didn't know if you heard me. It'll be the ones that impacted most, but then there's going to be ones that it's still there, but just more subtle. And then they may not get the support, but it's still there. It's just not as prevalent as some of the other people.
And what I've found, I mean, I've suffered from this as well, is that the uniquely draining like element of it sucks out all of your energy when you do it. When you have these thought patterns, you almost can't really focus on what you're doing with your life because you're stuck in thinking of what someone else is doing. And social media just makes it that much easier to get stuck into someone else's life and just, completely just forget that you actually have your own life to run. You are the person in charge of doing what you do, really. And I remember once, I think it was particularly at the time I was particularly struggling. For some weird reason, over one weekend, I became completely obsessed with the life of Marco Pierre White, the chef. And I was just obsessively just researching everything about him and his life over like the whole Saturday. Like I completely didn't do anything else. I just sat there, and that was the point when I thought, like, there's something not quite right here. Like, why? And even I look back at it now, I'm just thinking, why was I that obsessed about Marco Pierre White's culinary career? And part of it was, I suppose, I was a little bit envious that he was so young when he became famous and got his massive break and became a big chef in London. I suppose I was trying to almost kind of live vicariously in that moment and think, oh, if my life had been a bit like that. And and it's just such a waste of energy is basically my point. A lot of patients must feel that as well.
But I think that living vicariously is something that is really common, and kind of like, as you said, like getting completely sucked in. But then at the other end of that is people feeling the need to document every element of their life to then suck other people in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's kind of like that to and fro. Like often when you go out to, like, if I go, or when we're able to now, but like going out for dinner in London, like people be sitting there like constantly, their phone like documenting like every little thing, and it's just like just enjoy this. Like, I
can imagine, kind of given what you do in your line of career, that gets infuriating when you see people being that superficial. I've got even a worse example actually, because one of my friends was at a bar or restaurant, and a guy came up to him and said, "Can you actually just move out of the way because I want to take a shot for my Insta?" In the way. And this is now, and that's not the first time I've heard that kind of thing happening. Like, if it's going to a point where it's just too much. And I think, part of the trigger behind this is that you can monetize social media now so easily, and people are doing this for money. And I kind of imagine if you didn't do this, it was all just a society where it was moneyless. I think there'd be a lot of more helpful, supportive content out there, and things would grow which were naturally meant for society, which was good things, rather than being, because when you make it for money, everything is going to grow and be fueled for the purpose of making more money. So even if someone may not believe 100% what they're advertising or what principles that they're putting out there, but because they're popular and getting them money, or maybe kind of giving them more course fees or getting more clients in, they're like, just put it out there. And it can't be, do you see where I'm coming from a little bit?
Yeah, No, definitely. I think, and within that, like you may have had it like kind of when there's been companies approach me to like do things and to get sponsored or paid, and it's just like that's not what I'm here for. And yeah, and it's that kind of really tricky realms. But I know other people in our sort of field that do that, and obviously everyone's entitled to their choice, but it takes away, as you said, that really understanding maybe the values behind different companies and what the purpose of what the message that you're spreading is. But I think that's a whole other thing to look into.
I suppose, okay, final question really. Do you have any practical tips for people who are suffering from malignant comparisons?
I think we kind of touched on that, but like thinking about the distinction. So first of all, being able to recognize like the time that they're spending on social media, if we're thinking about just social media, and kind of looking at reducing that. So quite practical of being able to recognize and what is a normal or a good time period of that, reducing that. Then in terms of making the distinction, so really quite typical CBT of recognizing their negative thoughts, challenging those negative thoughts through looking for evidence for and against it, and being able to use maybe other supportive people around them to help to shift that perspective. Because I think if we're thinking of this in the framework of malignant comparison, that it can be really draining and really isolating, so you may need someone else that you can trust to help you to challenge your thoughts. Reduce the amount of filters that you are using as well.
I think filters, so if you personally use filters, it will change your mindset to make you want to compare more. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so thinking of some of the clients that I had, that they would only post pictures with filters. So we did like behavioural experiments. So, okay, what do they believe is going to happen if they post a picture without a filter? And their kind of belief was that they're going to get negative comments, and people aren't going to like it. They'll have to delete it within 30 minutes because it hasn't got like a certain amount of likes. So you have to do like, you do experiments with it and you challenge those beliefs. You rationalize them at first and then you challenge them. And yeah, so then getting them to post it without a filter and seeing what happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't realize the filter thing was that, and I've never used one before on my social media. I'm just, now obviously I know the extent of people even getting mental health help from using that. Great. I'm just trying to think anything else that would come in the practical tips side of things. Any other kind of steps that you'd suggest to people, or anything else coming to mind, would you say? Or?
So I think, yeah, kind of the adding in like the behavioural experiments with the kind of the things that they predict are going to happen. When we look at that, you have like predictions, but then precautions. So you have the predictions of what is going to happen and the precautions that you will take to make sure that the predictions don't come true. So for example, if we use a filter example, the prediction would be, I won't get as many likes if I don't use a filter. So the precaution would be using a filter. So it's being aware of what predictions and precautions that you make and challenging those by doing the things that are the opposite of them.
Okay.
Focusing on, another thing would be like looking at core beliefs, which again is like a whole other topic, but looking at ways of just focusing on your own strengths, making a note of like 3 to 5 things a day that either that you feel good about, that other people have mentioned, or just little things that you've achieved, or big things that you've achieved. So trying to strengthen your positive core belief, because I think the malignant comparison skews your positive core belief to be one that's more skewed towards like a negative core belief, so that I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough. So finding things that prove that you are worthy and you are good enough, and focusing on them. So really, oh, go on.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I didn't want to interrupt your flow. I was just going to. It is something where I don't think enough people even admit, and especially on social media, that they suffer from problems of comparison. Like the problem is very profound, but I think everyone's just digging it under the sand at the moment, and we don't know. It's the tip of an iceberg kind of thing, where we don't know exactly how big it is, but I suspect it's very, very, very big. And not enough people are coming forward and saying, look, I've got a problem with comparing myself too much on social media, or like, this is the reason I'm depressed, is because I constantly do this and I don't know how to stop it, that kind of thing. And I think the more we kind of understand that and kind of address it in kind of big publications in social media, I think that's better, because right at the moment there's not enough people kind of saying that this is happening to the extent it is. Do you agree?
Completely. And like I said, that sometimes it's almost that subcurrent, it's kind of that undercurrent, of like some people that it's severe enough that they enter therapy, then obviously that would be the therapist or psychologist that would pull that out of them, but they may not realize it themselves. And there's definitely a massive, like, underneath the iceberg that it's happening. And I see it in kind of like friendships groups as well as the clients that I see. And some of it is really, really subtle. And some of it is more extreme, but particularly with the people that you're close with, it's very difficult having a psychologist as a best friend. It's not my job to highlight the things, but you can see it in so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, one of the one of the tools that I've used before is to just kind of call yourself out when you're doing it. I know it may not work for everyone, but just kind of say, look, I'm comparing myself here. Just make sure, because a lot of the time you just do it without it's so easy to do it without realizing it, and the feeling that you get, and you're just like, you don't actively process it, but when you actively process it and say, look, I am comparing, then your brain just kind of just gets jolted and says, okay, I'm wasting time doing this. It's not useful for my productivity. And that's one of the things, kind of one of the tool tips, which I probably will mention in my book, amongst other things. I'm sure there's a lot of kind of neural mechanisms which can be kind of hacked in a way to try and stop people from doing this. But I think it's a societal issue as well. And like one of the big problems I have, especially for people in our generation, is like the under 30 lists for some reason. And I think it's a terrible thing where they're pressuring people to be successful under 30. And they've got that kind of list, but they don't have a list for people over 80. So where's the 80 over 80 list? All the generation who are doing something completely unique. Why are we so ageist in a society that we just hyper focus on someone who's under 30, that we care about the 18-year-old who's got a kind of $1 billion company or had this massive invention, and we don't care about the 80-year-old who's doing that? And I think that's such a flaw in society and kind of frustrating. And I'm sure it's making a lot of people feel unhappy that, oh God, I'm not on so-and-so list, I haven't got this achievement or whatever, when in actual fact, it doesn't matter at all. You know, it's not going to make you any happier fundamentally, and not really going to change your life in a big deal, really.
But we fool ourselves into thinking that that's where the happiness is going to come from.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where and even like amongst like friendship groups, you see it that, okay, well, all of my friends are like married and with kids, and I haven't, but forgetting that they've been like absolutely doing amazing at their career for the last 5 years, but because they haven't got that thing, then it's, oh, I failed.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's so many different facets to it, and I suppose we can go on forever and talk about it. I suppose I wanted to keep this quite brief and kind of keep it to about half an hour, and that's answered all the questions I had here with me. So thanks a lot for answering all that. And maybe, you know, you could even, I don't know how good you are at editing stuff and like breaking this up for like little snippets on your kind of social media and that kind of thing. I tend to do that with my YouTube, actually. I'd record like a longer video and then just chop it up and then put some piecemeal onto kind of reels and stuff like that. So you may find that you may find that some use out of this when I send it. But yeah, do you have any questions for me or anything like that, or anything that you're interested about?
No, obviously you kind of explained where it comes from. I think it's just to kind of be exciting to see where this goes. I think it's just such an important conversation to be having. So it's more just to kind of keep me in the loop how it progresses.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, there's very, very few books kind of published on comparison culture at the moment. And I think we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg, and more people are just going to come forward and write. And we need insightful things as well. We don't need, there's a lot of books which are just poorly written, which just go up in really kind of superficial ways to change your mindset. You know the kind of book that you read. I mean, as a psychologist, you might know this, like you kind of read like these tips are just so superficial. It's just like, make sure you eat a healthy diet, lots of vegetables, you know, or just like a very superfluous statement like, oh, just stop comparing yourself, or like just as if like it's that easy to do, and just like kind of reel it off. And I hope to go into more level of detail where it just kind of digs under all the kind of psychological mechanism which is going on, and even kind of the neural programming which is causing this. So yeah, I definitely think we need more books like that. There is one book actually out at the moment, which the irony is that I've compared myself to this book as well, which is being released. But hopefully I'll have a different slant on it. But it's a book called Comparisionitis, and I think it's made by some Australian blogger.
Okay.
Can't remember, but maybe it's interesting to have a look at, I suppose, from a psychological point of view as well. But yeah.
I see. And it's just, yeah, I think it's just fascinating. I completely agree that there's so many, like I'm trying to write like different books myself, and then just kind of I want to put all this psychological information in it, and it gets to a point I feel like I've just put too much in it, I'm just going to confuse people. But then you don't want to make it so simple that you're not really getting underneath it. Like I love neuropsychology, and I think there's so much that we can learn from that, and tips and techniques that you can use, like as I said, with the positive core belief things, and doing that has been shown to change the neural pathways in your brain by practicing techniques like that. So
really, yeah, that's fascinating stuff, I'm sure. Right, perfect, I'll let you go.
Thank you for speaking to me.
Absolutely, no, it's a pleasure, and keep in touch via social media, and
we won't compare each other, so it's
fine. No, absolutely not. I'm glad we're in sufficiently different fields anyway.
But right. Thank you. Okay. Have a good evening.
Pleasure. Cheers.
All right, take care. See you later.
Bye-bye.